Hey everyone, it's Mace1370. The Ambition RTA season is over. I did manage to finish in Legend. I was pushing really hard, so I'm very happy that I made it. You can see the new cool frame that we got yesterday here, and the Kise skin to go along with it. Both are, I think, pretty cool. Here's the final tally for the season for me. I ended rank 72. It might have changed a little bit in the last couple minutes, but I was around rank 70. 3,767 points with a 62.2% win rate, which I think is pretty good. I had 477 wins and 290 losses over the course of the season. It was actually quite scary. I was, I believe, 11 points below this, so I was at 56 points about an hour before the season ended, and I thought I might be safe, but then around, I think it was 30 minutes or so before the end, I was at rank 99. I thought there's no way that's going to hold, so I have to play one more game. So I played it, and then I won, just pushing me, safely into the Legend cutoff. So I thought we could go through the different heroes I have. I can show you how I built them for the season. We can talk about which ones were meta-relevant, which ones didn't actually get used very much, and maybe speculate, where things could go in the future. So let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, well, we'll go one by one through everything here, but before we get into that, I thought we'd just show a couple of the most relevant units. So the first one is Rimeru. Rimeru was completely insane ever since he was released, all throughout the last day. He was very, popular for people to draft, especially early on in the draft. I decided to build him as a bruiser with pretty decent damage. I wanted him speed tuned at 200 because some of my attack buffers are at like the 215, 220 mark, and then others are at the 250. So I wanted him to be able to fit into either of those drafts, and that's why I picked 200 speed. Also helps with his turn cycling. And then I wanted at least about 9k MCD. So this is slightly over that with Draco Plate, taking that into account because it's a 30% extra crit damage. And then once I got those numbers, I just wanted him as bulky as possible. I can show you his gear here. Rimeru was super powerful with the buff stealing mechanic, that's built into his kit. If you took him early, it really allowed you to control the draft, since people didn't want to take popular units like, Maid Chloe, defense buffers, attack buffers, etc. into you once you had Rimeru. Rimeru also, because he could counter and steal buffs, with his passive here, could also protect you against certain aggressive, types of players. So if somebody had Closer Charles with FCC, really hard to take that into Rimeru, because even if the Charles isn't on immunity, he has that shield, so he'll proc Rimeru, and then Rimeru steals, the evasion and attack buff and stuff like that, and makes it really hard for the enemy team to do anything against that. Also, Rimeru, the fact that he can defense break, which is built into his kit, on top of the huge damage from his skill 3, was really clutch, because there were a lot of pen set Aravis running around, and those could be really hard to kill, but you could pretty easily defense break them with Rimeru. So we'll talk about Aravi next. I think this was one of my top drafted units. Aravi was a pretty frequent first pick for me. I pre-banned Belly in most games, and then I would first pick Aravi if I had a first pick. I built her as a pretty tanky bruiser with a priority on hit points. I wanted her to turn cycle well, so I built her at 210 speed, and then I wanted just as much crit damage as I could get once I got her to about 2k attack. So this is, I think, all very high gear score gear on her in order to get to these stats. This necklace rolled insanely well from Abyss, so I was very pleased with that. Aravi was another hero that was just completely stupid on the last day in terms of her power level. She gave you so much insurance against aggressive comps, against enemy bruiser comps. The fact that she could res, gave you a ton of sustain and, long-term power. Her Crimson Seed artifact that I put her on, I think, is one of the best choices for her, because an Aravi that gets debuffed is an Aravi that cannot really do her job. If she has mischance or if she gets provoked, it can really cripple you, stun, etc. So those are two very popular units that were picked on the last day. I think we can just go down the list for the rest of them. Kise, I think I picked once or twice. She is, I'd say, very situational, but in the situations that you can use her, she's super strong. 270 speed so that she would take the first turn, and then just as much damage as you can possibly get with that speed was kind of my thought process for building her. I put her on Basket because, you want those greater attack buffs to get the damage out, and then you want her EE to, reduce the buff duration, right, so that she can apply the cooldown reset. The few times I took Kise was at the end of a draft when the enemy had not taken any fast units and they had a unit like Lqc or Carrot because the reset was really helpful. And I think I did that once or twice. She seemed to work out for the most part when I did that, but it was kind of hard to take her because it just felt like there was a lot of damage, and I don't know. Maybe it was my playstyle, but you really had to get value on that reset to make it worth drafting her. Arbiter Vildred, built him at 230 speed, and then once I got to that speed mark, I just wanted as much damage as possible. I used to have him at 240, but I didn't draft RB a ton, and so I kind of had to nerf his speed a bit just to keep him, I guess, relevant for my draft. I needed him to do enough damage to punch through teams without mitigation, essentially. My thought process for drafting RB was, again, typically in the 4 to 5 slot against a team that either didn't have mitigation or had only one mitigation that I could ban, in the post-ban. And in those situations, RB was really strong because if you get one Gab, you pretty much delete those teams. And if you don't have Gab and you do have an attack buffer, like 2 S3s with attack buff will do the same thing. So RB was still relevant. I did draft him a couple times towards the end. Operator Sigrid was a really strong hero who I drafted with Closer Charles pretty frequently, sometimes Amelia as well, typically into people that would take FCC early on in the draft because she just creates a must ban for you in that situation. Her S2 is going to delete something 100% of the time if you have attack buff, and then her S3 is going to do crazy big damage if they let her through. So I built her at 240 speed because I had some 250 speed attack buffers that I wanted to use her with, or 260 in the case of Amelia. And then once I got to that speed level, I just stacked as much damage as I possibly could get. I kept her on Guiding Light, even though Melon, was released a few days before the end of the season. Melon, I feel like, wasn't a huge presence. Not many people were drafting her, so I still felt safe taking Guiding Light units. And additionally, I felt like she had enough damage, so I didn't need a damage artifact with these stats. Top model Lilica, I think I drafted once on the last day, and she got banned. So her gear, I guess, isn't really relevant, or wasn't relevant in that situation. I wanted her at 250 speed because I wanted her to be able to outspeed most Arbiter Vildreds, because that would be one scenario I would take her into. Another scenario I would take her into would be a Maid Chloe if they also had a squishy unit. And so, also because I didn't have immunity, I couldn't take her into any draft where they had like Cerise or something fast, right? So if they took Maid Chloe, for example, and Politis, if they didn't have mitigation, I could probably just skill 3 the Politis without using my skill 2 and just delete her because of the damage. And I think that's pretty good against Maid Chloe since, a big part of her kit is the revive, and having a unit that can just extinct something on turn 1 is really powerful. But you can only do that if they bring a squishy unit along with Maid Chloe, and people were not doing that very much because of Apocalypse Ravi. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit, but Apocalypse Ravi essentially created a scenario where once you took Ravi, nobody wanted to bring a squishy unit into you because that would be an easy target for you to skill 3. So I think that was part of the reason why I didn't draft Top Model Lilica more. Here's Strays. I had to nerf him a teeny bit. I actually didn't pick him much on the last day. I picked him a lot on the second to last day, because on the second to last day I was doing a lot of Closer Charles cleave, and it worked like really well, and then all of a sudden it didn't work at all. I won, I think it was literally 13 games in a row using Closer Charles, and then I lost like 5 in a row. And I think it's probably luck of the draw. The way I was drafting him was probably not the best. I was picking him probably a little too early, and I think I was just running into people in the beginning that were not willing to speed contest me, but if people did speed contest, it was really difficult to deal with. So I ended up nerfing Strays. I gave his plus 30 Draco to Rimeru because I used him a lot more, and that lowered the attack here a little bit. You should have 4100 attack on Strays. I just basically didn't pick him on the very last day, so I wasn't super concerned about it. I wanted him to have a little bit of bulk to be able to survive a hit if I brought him with like FCC or something, and then 240 speed and enough crit damage to kill something. So this was Strays. I think he is really good. I just don't think I'm comfortable enough playing really aggressive to risk doing it on the last day. I think gotten better at playing aggressive, but I'm still not comfortable enough to risk it in like a high stakes scenario. So speaking of Closer Charles, here he is. He is at 281 speed, which I think is probably the absolute bare minimum you can have him at. And then he has pretty decent damage with 84% crit. It will be 85 if this ever gets maxed, or if I just slate his last imprint. And that's where you want it, because his, what is it, his, this thing, yeah, gives him perception, and that'll give him the rest of the crit chance you need to get to 100%. Closer Charles is a unit who I think was really underrated when he came out, and is an absolute powerhouse right now. But you can only really pick him towards the end of the draft against a opponent who is not in a place to speed contest you, just because you need to build him with damage, and you can't do that and also get him to like 300 speed unless you have absolutely insane gear, which I mean, this gear that I have on him is, I think, pretty good, and it's not, you know, good enough to do that, right? So you'd have to have truly cracked out gear to get him up to, you know, like 293, 294 speed or something like that. I put Violet Talisman on him because I didn't really have any other thief artifacts, and most thieves cannot use Violet Talisman, but Closer Charles actually can. He's typically taking turn 1 when you draft him, so he immediately gets that 10% evasion, and that puts him up to 60% when he gets his buff, and he gets back around to his next skill 1 really fast. So in most games, he has Moonlight Dreamblade level of evasion with Violet Talisman before they can really respond to him, and I think you know, that makes it very viable on him. A typical sequence would be you would skill 3, and then after he skill 3s, you could boost him up with Amelia, and that'll take him half the way there, and then your follow-up damage like Strays or something like that will then trigger his passive here and give him the other 50% boost, and so you get a turn with him right away. The amount of damage he does on his what do they call it, demolition attack here is totally absurd. It was pretty reasonable to be hitting enemies for like 9 to like 14k with it, depending on, you know, how tanky they were. Summertime Assaria, not a unit that I was super comfortable drafting, but it's a unit that I think I should be able to pivot into in the right scenarios. It would help if I built Ran. I don't have Ran built yet. I do have Cerise, and so she can be used with that, but I think Ran is probably better with her. Summertime Assaria, you want to build about 240 speed, so I had her here. I think it's best if you can get her like 260, but it's pretty hard to do that. I wanted her to have at least 5k attack and 150 effectiveness, so once I got to these numbers, I just made her as tanky as possible. Since I didn't want to put super premium speed gear on her, since I actually didn't draft her that much. But she is incredibly scary, you know, in the right scenarios against a team that doesn't have a lot of control stuff, because she can just completely obliterate the game all on her own. You absolutely need her artifact at plus 30 though to use her, and I think that's probably a design choice that they should move away from. Unfortunately, it seems like they've done the opposite of that, and moved more towards, you know, plus 30 artifacts that require, or artifacts that require plus 30 to have a 100% chance to do whatever it is they do. Okay, here's Melon. So Melon came out 2 days before the end of the season, which I think is completely absurd, but it is what it is. I didn't get a ton of time to test her, but I did jump in a mock lobby with some guildmates the day before the end of the season, and we played quite a few games with her. And the general consensus is that the Bruiser build just didn't really seem to do enough. Maybe there's a Bruiser draft that she does fit in okay, you know, with her own artifact on counter set or something. It just didn't seem to do enough damage to really matter. The one build that did seem to work well, though, was a super high damage build. This type of build, though, is pretty vulnerable, right? Because you're at 200 or so speed and you're on pen set. So you can only draft her literally at the very end of the draft when they're not speed contesting you, or when you have a way to boost her up to the front, like with Amelia or something like that. So you can't take her into Cerise, you can't take her into, you know, Falcon or Chloria, like any unit that could potentially disrupt her. And given this build, and given that the enemy doesn't have a lot of mitigation, can one-shot Landies. So that's kind of the scenario I used her in. She has to be on book for this type of build because you need to soul burn to get the attack buff and then skill 3. And that soul burn, skill 1 into skill 3 combined can typically extinct most Landies. Maybe not with FCC if they're on the higher end of the tanky side, so you may have to ban out the FCC if you do that, but all that said, I drafted this Melon 3 times, I think, on the last day, and she won every single game. Like, when she made it through, she just obliterated the enemy, because they were like the protect the landy type comps, and Melon just came in and deleted it. So it was really effective. Oh, I guess I didn't show her gear. It is a fairly similar build to Fire Mercedes, I think, where you're going for a little speed, a little bulk, and then just as much damage as you possibly can. Okay, here's Briarwitch Assaria. I think that this unit went up in value big time at the end of the season. there's a few reasons for that. I think Rimeru is a big part of it because he was so buff reliant, right? And so having a unit that could put unbuffable and deal a bunch of damage became very valuable to have into Rimeru. But you typically had to draft her later in the draft, like around spot 4 or 5. I think around 200 speed is where you want her. You want her to go before your DPS, ideally. So maybe like 220 would probably be better. And then that way she strips away the buff so your follow-up DPS can go. But I just had her at 200 and it seemed to work okay for the most part. About 4k attack and just literally as much damage as you can get on her once you get to the speed you want. I put her on Misha because Guiding Light just didn't seem super relevant since I was only really drafting her in scenarios where they wouldn't have a unit to disrupt her anyways. So I wanted, you know, the hit chance and crit damage buff to that. Here's her gear. And yeah, I think I drafted her a few times and she always performed really well when I did. So I was very happy to have her built on the final day. Here's Mercedes. This is a unit that was very popular for a little while and then kind of died off. But I did see her on the last day a few times, and I drafted her once or twice. I think it's just a testament to how the meta shifted that she kind of fell out a tad. It really kind of changed over to like single target damage dealers. Her gear is pretty standard bruiser type stuff. Again, I wanted her speed tuned to around 200, and then to have some bulk. I had her on a build before where she was like 11 or 12k HP and then like 13 or 1400 defense. And her damage was much less. It was like 3500 attack and like 250 or 260 crit damage. That build I was not a huge fan of, even though it was much tankier, if only because she needs to do damage, and you're proccing a lot of potential damage with this character because your skill 2 will trigger twice if you have attack buff, and then if the artifact triggers and you have attack buff, that's like 2 more attacks. So she gets a lot of return value on damage. Additionally, her artifact gives her quite a bit of mitigation here, this 25% damage reduction on crits. So you actually don't need to build her that tanky, and I felt like this amount of bulk was fine on her. Okay, Politis. I did draft a decent amount, but I had to be careful because she's not that tanky, and I never really wanted to take her into Apocalypse Ravi. And I think that's a merit for the tankier build, you know, like on counter set. With higher effectiveness and like Abyssal Crown, but I tended to draft Politis when I was going aggressive, and I wanted a character that could do damage, so I had her on kind of a high damage bruiser build. Again, 211 speed just for cycling and, you know, to get her turn, 250 crit damage, 3600 attack or so, and you know, when she worked well, she worked really well. She was a very strong pick into Amelia. She was a very strong pick into AOL. And she really just did her job, you know, when you drafted her in the right spot. Kind of a Soul Weaver Disruptor type of pick. I think that the counter build is also very viable, though, and you could definitely do that depending on your playstyle. Here's Landy, who I left on Guiding Light on the last day. Didn't draft a whole lot, but the few times I did, she worked well. People I just think had not invested into Melon yet, and so I really didn't see very many Melons. I think a lot of people were talking about, oh, I'm going to switch my Landy to like counter Bloodstone on the last day because of Melon, but frankly, I just like never saw her. I don't think anyone ever drafted her against me, actually, now that I think about it. Landy's build has not changed in a little while. It's the same, just immunity, speed set, about 200 speed, and I was shooting for like 3,300 attack with 250 crit damage, and once I got there, I just wanted max bulk. She has very high gear score and she is triple S, so this is a, I think, very premium Landy build. You could sack a little defense for more HP, but you're just going for EHP, and I actually really liked the high defense on her because I really like drafting Landy with FCC. A lot of people draft her with Carmen, and I think that's okay too, but the shields from FCC really help Landy stay in stealth, and if you have a high defense build, the shields have huge synergy with that defense, right? So I really preferred drafting her with FCC. With Carmen, it felt like it was too easy to pop her out of stealth and just kill her. Rimeru, we already talked about. Here's Ambitious Tywin. I actually didn't draft him on the final day, but I did change his build towards the end of the season, and I did pick him a few times, like in the last week leading up to the end. So he was not completely irrelevant in the meta. You know, he did have some potential like niche options where you could take him. Again, usually at the end of the draft when they had not drafted immunity and they didn't have any cleanses, and they weren't running you over with damage. So Not very common, you know, in terms of that scenario, but it did happen a few times, like when they would pick a tank and then like 4 bruisers or something. Like some people did do that, and then he was really strong into that. I wanted him tanky, I wanted him reasonably fast, and then I wanted him to have high effectiveness. So I just built as much effectiveness as I could get. I went 190, and it was pretty solid because you could comfortably take him into any type of Soul Weaver and just know that you were going to land debuffs for the most part. Still kept him on Holy Sack because he would be a priority kill target. He's imprinted, and yeah, I think that's pretty much all there is to say about him. Here's Spectre. I actually changed her build a little bit at the end. Previously I had her at 11k HP and like 1550 defense, I think, and she had less attack. She was at like, I want to say 3500 attack and 250 or 249 crit damage. And I just noticed when I was playing her that she was never in a threat of dying. She always had plenty of HP, and I kind of struggled sometimes killing things with her. So I dropped her bulk a teeny bit. I think I lost like 80 or so defense and 600 or so HP, and I raised her crit damage some. And I was a lot more comfortable with that build. She's on pretty high gear score lifesteal stuff. I tried switching her to a speed build for a bit. Didn't feel like the gain in stats made up for the loss of lifesteal, so I put her back on lifesteal. I mean, I still think Book is a really strong choice for her, even though Bellion runs around. That said, though, I did pre-ban Bellion in like 95% of my games. Here's FCC. Picked her decent amount on the last day. She's still a really strong tank. I wanted her at, you know, pretty fast, like 218, 220, and then I wanted her to have like 100 plus effectiveness, and once I got those stats, I then went as tanky as I could get, focusing on hit points, just because, you know, the hit points scale with her barrier a bit better. So I felt like that was a pretty good build. It's really awesome if you're able to provoke like Crows and Amelias and stuff, and you oftentimes can with an effectiveness build like this. Some people were getting wise to it though and raising the ER on their healers. So this is kind of a cycle that goes around and around, and when you notice enough people are doing that, just switch her back to crit damage, wait for them to drop the ER, and then you can put effectiveness back on her, and we will repeat the cycle. Here's Rylet. Drafted him a decent amount on the day before the last day, but only in aggressive teams, and I just did standard on the last day, so didn't draft him on the last day, but the day before I definitely did, usually with Closer Charles. The idea behind this Rylet is you draft him with a CR booster like Amelia or Closer Charles, and he has enough hit points to not just get, you know, one shot, but the rest of that goes in, the rest of his stats go into damage. And this Rylet hits like a Mack truck. I deleted like Bellions with mitigation on the field, just like one tapped him. I deleted Maids, just, you know, like off the face of the planet. Pretty satisfying when that happened. Lifesteal is still a really good set on him, just because it helps him heal up the chip damage. You know, if he gets hit, or if, you know, like the enemy attacks him and he dodges, is what I'm saying, you can heal that up with lifesteal pretty easily. And I think Shepherd of the Hollow is by and far the best artifact for him. Unfortunately, mine's only plus 18. Hopefully it gets to plus 30 one day. Ravi, we talked about her. Crow, I did draft 2 or 3 times on the last day, but only against either against players I knew were going to take LR Crow, or you know, had a proclivity to do that, or against tank players that, you know, I knew would play AoE, so I would get value off of him. I think this is a pretty good Crow build. My goal with him was 200 speed, 100 ER, and then the rest I wanted into bulk with a priority on hit points, because you want as much health as possible to maximize his S3 kill potential. So this is, I think, a pretty solid Crow. It's no Vinny Crow, but it's a good Crow. And obviously Aureus is a really good option for him, and he is triple S. Okay, here's Assassin Sid. So Assassin Sid, I originally had at 300 speed with way more damage, but that was not cutting it. Apparently everyone zooms now, and 300 is not fast enough, so I moved him up to 310. Unfortunately, I had to drop his damage pretty heavily to do that, since the only really fast neck I have is a crit chance neck, and it's really hard to make up that crit damage when every piece on him has to be like Omega fast, right? So here's the gear. It's all like, except for the ring here, I guess it's all 20 plus speed. This is enough damage to one-shot a squishy unit without mitigation, just barely, like with Portrait. So I never failed to kill with him, and actually he won my very last game. I forget who it was against, but it was a guy who went into Pavel Cleave, and I last picked Acid, and I had AOL earlier in the draft. He banned out the AOL, Acid outsped, and just one-shot the Pavel, and that was game. So I think these days, if you're building Acid to counter Cleave, you just need to prioritize speed as much as you possibly can. Obviously, you do need enough damage to, one-shot a Squishy, but you don't need like 3,000, 250 crit damage on him to do that. I built my LR Crow to be able to take into Bellion by giving him like 100 ER, and I didn't pick him a single time the last day just because I was pre-banning Bellion the whole time. But I guess this would be an okay build if I wasn't pre-banning Bellion and I wanted to take LR Crow. He's an A imprint. You basically just go for the 100 ER, about 23 to 24k, and then as much defense as you can get. I remember when he first came out, we were looking at his multipliers, and I don't think you get a ton of return on his skill 3 damage above 23k. Like, you obviously get some return, but it's not nearly as much as getting up to 23k, it felt like. So that was my reasoning for LR Crow. Put him on Adamant Shield just because mitigation is nice. You could put Portrait on him as well, that's another option. Here's Angel of Light Angelica. Drafted her decent amount on the last day. She's, absurdly overpowered. What is there to say about it? You don't need like amazing speed gear on her. I actually wanted a bit of bulk, so I kind of dropped her speed a bit to keep her bulky, because I wanted 150 ER on her. She's, I think, just flat out overtuned. Not fun to play against. You have to kind of warp your whole draft around her. I totally agree with people that say that. So hopefully they nerf her a bit or something, because I don't think she's in a great state right now. I think she's too OP. But yeah, I would pick her when people would take Rimeru. She's good into him, right? Because she's an unbuffable unit. Took her into like FCC Landies, into Blood Moon Haste, a lot of things like that. And got some good experience playing against Angel of Light Angelica as well. Here's Carrot. Did not draft her on the last day, which was a huge breath of fresh air compared to the previous season where I had to first pick her every single game. I don't think I've really changed her build much. She is, 14k HP, 1700 defense, 4k attack. I wanted her a little slower than like Biceria, and then I'd like more effectiveness on her, but I think I took some of my premium gear off her just because I don't pick her anymore. I think Book is still good on her. Ruel is a hero who I think really kind of improved on the last day, the last couple days, because everyone shifted to a single target focus. I guess really since Rimeru came out, Ruel stocks went way up. Ruel is always going to be amazing in a meta where people have to use 1 or 2 skill 3s to like delete one of your units, because she just gets to undo that, right? So if they use more than 1 S3 to kill a unit and you just S3 and bring it back, like you've probably gained value. You might have lost a bit of tempo, but chances are they had to use 2 skill 3s to kill something, and so that's a good trade for you. For her build, I wanted her at 200 speed with 150 ER and then just as much bulk as possible. I have her on Touch of Rekos because one of her weaknesses is healing up AoE damage. She's really good at single target damage, but she really struggles with AoE, right? Because all her heals are single target except for the soul burn. So Touch of Rekos, I think, helps to mitigate that weakness. You could put her on Water's Origin as well. That is a viable option. Alright, here is Troublemaker Crozet. This guy is one of my F10 counters, Guided Decision, and he's fast. So also just a good hero to take into Anti-Cleave. I think another really good choice for him is Holy Sack, because again, you can take him into Strays, and Strays kills him, and then he just comes right back. I think that would be a totally viable choice for him as well. 2300 HP. I wanted him to have more hit points than a Ravi, because when I was running him on Holy Sack for a bit, and so you want him to take the Strays S3, so the Holy Sack procs. About 100 ER is probably where you want him, and then I just wanted him really fast to be able to cut against aggressive players. I think I did draft him a few times at the end, and then his CR boost S3 is, I think, really good. Okay, here's Maid Chloe. Her build changed a lot throughout the season. I think originally I had her at 200 speed with really high bulk and like 150 ER, and then I changed her to 250 speed, I think around 100 ER or so with like high bulk as well, and I really hated that build. It just wasn't my playstyle. I know a lot of people did that. It just wasn't really for me. So I brought her down to like 209 speed, and I wanted a high ER cleanser, and Chloe was really good for that. So it was nice to have her as kind of insurance against F10E in case they picked her into me. Obviously, it wouldn't resist all the F10Es out there because there are some people that run like 200 plus effectiveness, but it is what it is. So she's like 250 ER, I think, with her passive, and so this resisted most things, honestly. So she's very high ER. Picked her quite a bit, and she worked out really well. She resisted a lot of AOLs too, even though she didn't really need to. Here's Sage Ball. He's kind of on whatever gear. I don't think it's anything super specific. I just kind of wanted like a lot of bulk with enough ER to prevent random provokes, and then as fast as I could get him once I got him to around this amount of bulk on proof. He was strictly an anti-cleave pick. I picked him, I think, once on the last day against the Pavel Cleaver. Here's Basar. Drafted him once. He worked okay. I did like the slow build with really high effectiveness and crown. And my intent with Basar was I only wanted to take him into people who I knew were running like the 250 maids. So I wanted him fast enough to like potentially cut in between them and like some bruisers or something. I guess I should have maybe sped him up to like 230 or 240 for that, but whatever, this was fine. Yeah, I think he got banned like the one time I took him. Kind of whatever gear. I don't really draft him much. Against teams with like no cleansers, he's fine with the crown just because you can kind of cheese some wins there. Here's Falconer Clury. I think she actually got faster since last season, but I drafted her 4 times and she got resisted every single time. She didn't land a single debuff, so her strip got resisted. So she lost 4 games for me on the final day because I would S3 into an immunity and it just didn't work. So it was kind of grief. But I think she's still potentially pickable in some spots. She's not the powerhouse she used to be. Here's Mediator Cowrick. He is, I think, a really strong hero right now, and I haven't settled on a build for him. This was when I was testing. I drafted it a few times on the last day, and it seemed okay. I wanted him at 250 speed. That was kind of non-negotiable because I wanted him to be able to be a cleanser for an aggressive team. And then beyond that, I wanted him to have bulk, and I thought it'd be nice if he could have damage, so I tried to get everything. I don't think you can, really. Like, this build still doesn't do much damage. I'd probably drop some crit damage for more bulk, I guess. Maybe switch him to a crit chance neck or something like that. I think might be better, just so he can still do a little chip damage. So this build is not finalized, but I know I want him around 250 speed. The question is, how much bulk do I want on him? Beyond that, Warhorn is, I think, a really good choice for him to help him cycle. He's really strong into AOL, so that's usually where I picked him, was an anti-AOL pick. Here's Inferno Kwazu. I built this to try to counter Summertime Isarias, and it kind of worked. I did it once or twice. My thought was, like, most Summertime Isarias are like 240 speed, and I think he gets more CR than they do. I think Isaria gives 15% and he gives 20. So I thought, okay, if they S3 with like Ran or Cerise, he'll cleanse and then push up, and then I can use him to delete Isaria. So that did work, but the problem is that Isaria still triggers her passive and bombs your team. So it does prevent Isaria from soul burning and then skill 3ing, which is nice, but it does not prevent the bombs from being put on you, which is kind of unfortunate. So I would call this build a mild success. I put him on Uberius Tooth because this guy is a 1-for-1. He's going to kill Isaria and then probably not do really anything else for the rest of the game. So I just wanted as much damage as I could to try to make sure that happened. Let's see, Diane, kind of a standard build, 240 speed, with some bulk and like 150 ER, nothing special. I don't think I drafted her on the last day. She was really strong before Rimeru came out, and then Rimeru came out, and she disappeared. Kind of unsurprising though, right? She buffs, and she's a blue unit, so. Here is F10E. Didn't draft her on the last day, really, just because I think it's really hard to predict nowadays, like what units might have guided decision, you know, what units are super high ER. So I didn't really draft F10E. I felt like she was kind of risky. So I've nerfed her a bit. She was faster. I think she was like 291 before, but I took some of her gear off and gave it to other people. I think she's still really strong in the right scenarios. She can be very scary, but you have to be pretty confident that they don't have an answer for her, and because she's so powerful, like most people have answers built up. Aravi, I don't think has really changed. I might have nerfed her stats a teeny bit just because she's not super pickable right now, but the one area that she does shine in is against AOL, since you can bring bruisers that are single target, so you're not going to trigger AOL's passive, and they're not super buff reliant, right? Like Ravi doesn't, sorry, just Ravi doesn't really need buffs to work well. So sometimes I would draft her with Ravi, Lqc, Stenny, stuff like that into an AOL and just try to out-sustain them. General Purgus, he's kind of holding random gear. I just wanted another attack buffer at like 250 speed just in case. No real reason I put comment on him. I just wanted an artifact with stats on it, and this gave him some crit chance to help, you know, shore up his crappy crit chance right here. I don't think I picked him a single time. No, maybe I picked him once. But I meant to pick the other General Purgus and not this one. So here's Green Violet. Yeah, he was still a menace a bit on the last day. Like, a few people picked him, but his stocks definitely went down with Rimeru and Melon, right? I think this build is really solid. You know, you want a certain amount of bulk on him, and you want like 160 speed, I think, and then beyond that, you just want damage with pen set. He's a little overcapped on crit right now, so his gear is not super optimized, but I think it's fine. Like, honestly, Violet does his job even with kind of crappy gear. Archdemon didn't pick a single time. Virtually impossible to pick Archdemon with all of the LQCs running around, but I can show her gear here really quickly. Maybe they're going to change her to make her meta relevant, but right now she is not, unfortunately. Here's Amelia. I picked her a fair amount. When I first built her, I had her on Tome, and I actually think that Tome is kind of a troll artifact on her because you cycle so quickly, you can't really use her abilities well. She's skill 2s, and she cycles so fast that you take your turn to skill 3 before you've taken any damage. So you almost have to like waste your skill 3, so then you can skill 2 again really fast. So it feels like you're giving up your skill 3 to get 2 skill 2s really quickly, and that felt bad. She's about 100 or so ER, and then if I self-imprint her, she goes to 120, plus she gets the 15 here, so she's at like 137 or so. I wanted her at 260 speed with bulk, and then I wanted her to have at least 100 ER just to be able to resist random provokes and stuff like that from units that had no effectiveness built on them. Here's the other General Purgus. This is the one I meant to pick, and I think I picked him the second match. He's good against Eller Crow. I wanted him against a tanky player, so I want him to have some bulk and like a little bit of damage, right, to be able to chip in. And then beyond that, just provide attack buff and CR boosts for the team, you know, into like AoE type units, but didn't pick him a ton. Cerise was on Guiding Light, switched her to Confile because of Rimeru. Didn't pick her a ton. She was relevant sometimes though, like if you wanted to take Summertime Iceria, and also against Fire Charlottes, she was good, so those were generally the scenarios I used Cerise in. Almost 290 speed with like 150 ER was kind of what I was shooting for, and then whatever bulk I could get. Aras, I don't think I drafted him actually, but he's missing boots. I think he was at like 230 speed or so, so we'll skip Aras. Here's Blood Moon Haste. I did pick him a fair amount on the last day against like Maid Chloe's, and when I did, it worked really well because he's Blood Moon Haste, right? Obviously good into RB as well. His gear has not changed since the previous season, I think. I was just going for like massive bulk and like 190 speed on Idol's Cheer. I wanted a lot of HP for his, you know, S3 scaling, and then just as much defense as I could get. Here's my other Viseria. So this was a Viseria I was using to counter Charles Cleave, because most Charleses are like 280 speed. And I was doing a meme for a while where I had this Viseria at like 300 speed, and it worked really well until everyone realized that I had a 300 speed Viseria, and like once you know that it's 300, you can play around it. And the kind of the cat's out of the bag. Let's see, was it this build? What am I missing here? Do I have a 21 speed ring? No. Maybe it was only 299 speed. I thought I had it at 300 somehow. This ring is 21. Oh yeah, it was like that, okay. So yeah, I was doing this, and I think I had like boots with more effectiveness on to give her like 60 or 70 or so effectiveness. And like I said, this like took a few cleavers off guard, but once they know you have it, they can either pre-ban it or they know to ban it, right? So it was kind of a cheese thing that only worked a few times, but it was super glorious when it did work. I pulled a second Viseria, and like the second I did that, I was like, okay, I'm absolutely building a fast one to cheese some people, because it was really funny. T-Cern didn't draft. Here's my scuffed injury set Bellion. I tried to copy Panshui's stats, and I don't think I got there. It's just like really high bulk with like 190 speed and like a little bit of crit damage. I pre-banned Bellion most games though, just I didn't really enjoy playing her, and I absolutely hated playing against her. And she enabled the casino meta, so I just pre-banned her, and like that was that. Okay, here's Lqc. I think this is a very solid Lqc build. She was a total powerhouse on the last day. I wanted her at like 140 speed so that she would get a bunch of Hellcutter stacks, and then I wanted her enough bulk to be able to get the turn. And then once I had that, I just wanted pure damage. Her job was to delete A Ravi's and Fallen Cecilia's, and she did it pretty well. This is a lot of damage with pen set. So she takes a few turns and gets attack buff, and she will, you know, be doing like 30-40k or something absurd. Here's Carmen. Picked her a lot on the last day. Switched her to a counter build, mostly just because her base speed is so garbage. You're not really getting very much on speed set, and you want her slow anyways, so that your other units take their turn and then she gives them immunity while they're at the back of the CR bar. Immunity and invulnerability, I should say. Really strong tank. Tons of mitigation. A very popular hero for myself and many other people on the final day. Some people build her with effectiveness. I just put her on ER, just, I don't know. Mostly just because the gear I had ER on it. I think effectiveness could work. Here's Degen RB. I did not draft him a single time. He's kind of fallen out. I may just honestly put like a bunch of damage gear on him and turn him into a farmer. Luna's for expos. Here's Fire Charlotte. She is still really strong in the right spot. I kind of look to take her against people that would like draft double Soul Weavers, because she puts out so much damage, like they can't even heal through it. It's pretty absurd. She's obviously great into like Landy and stuff like that as well. Symbol of Unity helps a lot on her because she's AoE. But yeah, so I picked Fire Charlotte a fair bit, and she was a really strong unit. For her build, I think 170 speed is what you want to shoot for. You want like 3500 attack and as much crit damage as you can get with enough bulk to survive. So I think this is enough bulk, and I just went damage after that. Let's see, didn't draft Fighter Maya at all. Her build hasn't changed forever. Here's Rem, whatever, one of the R ones. She is a menace and a horrible hero to play against. I built her base speed really tanky. She obviously, you know, is really strong when she works, but if she doesn't pop off, it can kind of be underwhelming. I wanted her really thick, right, with enough damage to hurt. So I think this is a very solid Rem build. Let's see, SSB's build hasn't changed since the previous season. I didn't draft her a single time. She kind of fell out of the meta. I think if I wanted to draft her, I would probably move her more towards like a lifesteal build, maybe an injury set build. Here's Rawana. I don't think her build has changed either. I just went for bulk and counter, because it doesn't matter if she's fast or not. And then you want like 100 or 150 ER, so just so that she doesn't get debuffed. Let's see, Flitica did not draft. Kayron did not draft. I had this Elena built up for anti-Charles Cleave, but I actually didn't get Charles Cleave very much the last day, so I don't think I drafted this Elena. She's kind of on random gear. I was mostly just going for 260 speed, honestly, with a little bit of ER. My intent here was to just be able to cut, right, if like a Charles Cleaver tried to do that. Here's my ER ML Ken, an Eternal Work in Progress. Designer Lilibet, have not drafted in a long time. She's garbage. Let's see. Lilius, I think I did draft her into AOL, but I took some of her gear off, and I honestly don't remember what she had. But I want to say she was at like 230 speed with like more bulk and like more crit. So I wanted her to do a little bit of damage, but the bulk was the main priority. And I would draft her against AOL. You know, I guess I've taken gear off of Chamz and I didn't even realize it. Didn't draft him on the last day at all, but he's still running my Labyrinth expeditions, or whatever they're called. Let's see, we have more. Solitaria didn't draft. That might be it. I think that's mostly it. Did I draft Holiday Euphine? I did not. Yeah, so, you know, interestingly, like, we had a lot of new heroes come out, and there are a lot of heroes that did not really get used at all that I felt were used in previous seasons. I think that's it, yeah. So let me know if you have any questions on the builds. I think it was a really good meta overall. I think the game's in a pretty solid spot. Since the most recent collab, you know, a lot of the casino stuff has been pushed away to the side, so I really enjoyed playing. Happy to answer any questions you guys have. Otherwise, have a good day. Later.